you. Okay, so we're so happy everyone is here, and we're excited to present this amazing um, town hall on fairy tales, because we don't use fairy tales anymore. People think they're too scary. People think we shouldn't be doing those because um, it might really give children nightmares. And Stephanie is here to tell us that fairy tales are important. And so if you have found your raise your hand thing, which is, I'm trying to figure out where it might be. It's over under more on your Zoom screen. I'm just looking to see who knows where they're raising their, oh, here, that's a poll. We don't want that. Who knows where they're, oh, there. Oh, here comes Pat. If you know how to raise your hand, if you grew up with fairy tales, raise your hand. I see 4. I see 5. And you turned out okay, right? Oh, fairy tales are really important for children. Thanks so much for raising your hand. Pat says my hand is up. So Stephanie's going to talk to us about the risky play of children's literature with fairy tales. So I'm going to get that out, and we're going to try to make this thing move, and that may take me a minute. Okay, there we go. So there's 3 things I want to tell you about. This is the information for the conference, and we're looking for speakers right now. And I'm going to, I'm going to, during the session when Stephanie has control, I'm going to give you these links in the chat so that you can go to them. But the deadline for the proposals for the Louisville conference is May 1st. So please hurry. And we're doing both 4 settings, both anything that advocates for the child's right to play, both about great practices in the classroom. So we hope that you will join us. Louisville has been an amazing place. Oh, thank you. Michelle just put it. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle just put the link in the chat for you. And then Screen Free Week is on its way. So we also understand that screens are interfering with children's play. And so it's important for us to help families begin to sort of have some alternatives to screens in the home. And so Screen Free Week is annually celebrated on in May, like the first full week of May. So this year it's May 5th through the 11th. But you can celebrate screen free anytime, any time of the year. Some people do it Screen Free Fridays or Screen Free Saturdays, or no screens at the dinner table. Anything that helps children not be on screens as much as they currently are. And so anyone who wants to participate in Screen Free Week, there is a Google form that you can fill out to tell us what you're going to do. And I do have to say, we've got a North Carolina health department in a huge county in North Carolina who has adopted Screen Free Week, and the Commonwealth of Virginia has adopted Screen Free Week. And Screen Free Week is all over the world. And so we're very excited. And you can go to screenfree.org, and that's the website that has all the information. And IPA-USA just was awarded Screen Free after 10 years of it being at Fair Play. And so we're very excited to have that partnership with Fair Play and to be taking over Screen Free Week, because it is right in there with our mission of interfering with children's play. And then some of you may know that our 50th anniversary, we released a white paper, and the white paper is an amazing resource for you for advocacy. It has policy briefs in the back. It has press releases in the back, and there are 57 articles across 8 categories. Screen Free was awarded, the whole Screen Free initiative was awarded to IPA-USA. Fair Play said they want to do more advocacy work, and you can see the advocacy work they're doing, getting screens out of schools and iPhones out of kids' hands that are interfering with their learning. And so they sent an RFP out. We applied for it, and IPA-USA was awarded Screen Free as a new initiative underneath our umbrella. We were so excited. And so the white paper, Michelle, you'll put it in there too, will you? Oh, it does have, we have screen-free t-shirts to help families begin to understand there is an option. They don't have to do all this. I'm gonna, Michelle will get it for you. Michelle, can you put the screen-free t-shirt stuff in there and the IPA stuff? We always had trees over screens was one of our t-shirts for IPA-USA, and now we have others. So, some of them are I'm going screen free and all sorts of stuff. So the white paper had 57 articles, 59 authors, and it's all easy to read, wonderful stuff in 8 categories. And it's free to you. And you can find it on our website at ipausa.org/white paper. It's free to you. You download it. It's electronic. Go to the table of contents, look at something you're interested in, click on it, and it takes you right to the white paper. And so we're doing it again because many people said, but we didn't get to submit one, so we want to submit one. And so if you would like to be in our new white paper collection, the 2nd edition, then there's a Google form that, thank you, Michelle, for putting it in the chat for them. If you're interested in writing a white paper, you need to submit your interest on the form by July 1st. And if you don't like the 8 categories and you want another category, absolutely fine. You are welcome to create a new category. And then the white paper itself is due January 31st of next year. And the exciting part is it will be released at the International Play Association World Conference in New Zealand in 2026. So we're hoping to have lots of international contributions as well as many more of our wonderful people here in the US. So here's how we're going to do it. As Dr. Goloway moves through her presentations, ask a question in the chat. I'll break in and say, so-and-so has a question, and then you'll have a conversation about it. It's being recorded, and I'll also send the link to you as soon as it probably be next week. I'll send the link to you next week, and it will be on our YouTube channel. And anyone who signed up for it will get it first. And so you'll have it like 4 weeks before anybody else gets to see it. Again, if you have anyone you want to share it with prior to it being released to the world. And then questions, of course, go in the chat box. And so let me introduce you to Dr. Stephanie Goloway. Stephanie is a lifelong friend, even though I've only lived in Pennsylvania since 2006. She is an amazing, wonderful person. And if you haven't ever heard any of her porch play chats, you can find them for free on YouTube as well on the IPA-USA channel. And so Stephanie's a lifelong educator and advocate for play, storytelling, and imagination. She's taught preschool, elementary school, and special education, and has been a children's librarian and professional storyteller. She's now Professor Emerita of Education at the Community College of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, and is the author of this amazing book, Happily Ever Resilient, Using Fairy Tales to Nurture Children Through Adversity. And that's published by Red Leaf Press. And Stephanie, I think she just gets me all enthused, and I want to read more fairy tales to my grandchildren because she really makes it exciting to begin to think about how those fairy tales can build children's resilience and make them stronger for life's adversities as we move through our lives. So she has a weekly newsletter called Imagination on the Move, where she talks about fairy tales and gives you ideas. And tonight we get to have her all to ourselves. And I'm so excited. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. Stephanie, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to see everybody. I'm delighted to be here. If I can figure out how to, all right, do this the right way, right?
You're going to do it fine. We've already practiced.
We've practiced. All right. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
All
It's
right.
there.
Okay. So, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming. Deb's one of my heroes for keeping IPA-USA thriving and growing in all of the ways that we know that play can do. And I don't know when she has time to play herself, which sometimes is a concern. But I'm happy to be here. And tonight we're going to be talking about fairy tales, which I consider the risky play of children's literature. And as Deb said, if you have questions or comments, please pop them in the chat immediately. To me, a town hall is supposed to be a back and forth, and I'm not sure how to do it besides using the chat. But Deb's going to keep on top of it and make sure that I see your questions. And we're going to go forth and see what happens. All right. So Deb kind of gave you a introduction to all of the stuff I've done. I'm old as dirt. Here are a bunch of little symbols of the places that I've worked with kids ranging in age from 2 all the way up through community college students. My oldest student was 88. And throughout that, all of those many different ways of interacting with kids and adults, my focus has been on how thinking and learning develop, how the imagination develops, how we become social human beings, and fairy tales. I have always loved fairy tales. As a child, I had my mom read me fairy tales. I loved fairy tales. I read them. I played them. I wrote them. I was always dressed up as some fairy tale character. As a teacher, I used folk and fairy tales with my kids always, and by kids, I mean also college students. Um, I told stories, I read stories, played them um, frequently, and did all kinds of, I felt they were a wonderful basis for all kinds of learning and exploration opportunities. As a storyteller, which I did off and on, folk and fairy tales were all I did because they are created, that's where they come from, is from storytellers. So they were perfect to be able to share orally. And as a scholar, I did both my master's thesis, Once Upon a Piaget, it was about fairy tales and children's cognitive and socio-moral development and how they were aligned. And then many years passed and I came time to decided I'd finally get my doctorate, and I looked at fairy tales and resilience. And so that's kind of where this research or this presentation is kind of stemming out of all that. I wrote the book on, as Deb mentioned, Happily Ever Resilient. And so I'm all about the fairy tales. As a writer, I write about fairy tales. I do some writing of fairy tales, adaptations. But most important, I think, as a human being, I believe that fairy tales offer us clues into how to be more human and how to be more humane and compassionate and kind and brave and strong and all of those things. And so I'm bringing all of that into this presentation tonight. As Deb said, my goal is to convince you, if you're not convinced, that maybe fairy tales are worth a second look if you haven't given them that one recently. So we're going to start out, and you can put your answers in the chat to think about what was your favorite fairy tale. And I kind of like people to try to get back to when they were children, rather than what's your favorite fairy tale right now. And it's often, some of us don't read fairy tales all the time, I suppose. But if you could pop in the chat your favorite fairy tale, and maybe in 4 words or less, so super short, what did you like or not like about it, if you can remember? Ooh, Hansel and Gretel, Hansel and Gretel. Beauty and the Beast. Huh, Snow White, Little Mermaid, Cinderella. Oh, we're actually going to talk about getting lost in the forest tonight, Gemma. Elves and the Shoemaker. That's an unusual one that a lot of people don't know. That's great. Anybody else remember their fairy tales? I know Deb asked you to put your hand up if you had fairy tales that you remembered, if you read fairy tales as a child. Anybody else? Anyone else? Okay, well, those are wonderful examples of the fairy tales that we're very familiar with. And we're going to talk about actually all of them tonight. So, except I don't think I have anything about Elves and the Shoemaker, but I'll make sure I throw that in. Okay, so what are fairy tales? Knowing that we like them and we've read them is one thing, but there are, I thought all good presentations start with making sure that we kind of understand the words that we're looking at. So we're going to start with Fairy Tales 101. I know my friend Kelly Jarvis is here, and she teaches whole courses on this. So this is just the quick and dirty of a few things of what makes a fairy tale a fairy tale. And the most important folklorists who study these say that they are tales of magic, or tales of wonder is another term that's often used. And they are extensively studied. Um, and folklore is this big category, and it includes both stories and songs and all of that. Folk tales are a broader category of the stories within folklore. Um, Fairy tales are a kind of a subcategory of folk tales. There's a lot of overlap. You can talk about myths and legends. There are so many different uh, kinds of stories that come from that oral narrative tradition. And for me, that's one of the things that I think brings the power of fairy tales. There are plenty of fairy tales that are written by individual authors. The Little Mermaid, for example, somebody mentioned that was their favorite. That was written by Hans Christian Andersen. But there are mermaid and selkie stories from all over the world that are connected to that. So we have this huge, huge, huge pot of stories that have been told orally and passed on from person to person for millennia. And then we have what are 21st century stories that are coming out of that and in written form, and they're all connected. In this presentation, we're going to talk mostly about fairy tales because that's what my area of study is. But when we look at resilience, we really can find a lot of those same things in myths and legends, as well as literary fairy tales and the whole thing. But what I like about the oral tradition is partly that they are tongue polished, as the author Jane Yolen has called them. You can't have a story that's been told for 200, 500 years and not have the rough edges buffed out. So we get kind of the pure essence of story. Many people, when I was teaching community college, lots of my students assumed that there was one real version of a fairy tale, and that was the version that they saw on that they learned about from Disney. And I'm just here to say that Disney fairy tales are one small segment of some literary fairy tale subcategory, and they don't really represent the vast, amazing collection that is all over the world. So fairy tales, because they've been told orally, their roots were told orally, have a really distinct plot structure, stock characters, typical settings. Somebody said, I like getting lost in the woods. You got lots of woods in fairy tales, and we're going to be talking about that. But because they have these certain characteristics, it's really useful for children as they're learning to read and write to hear those, because it helps them to understand how stories work. And if you're worried about kids learning to read and write, if you happen to be an educator or a teacher, that's a bonus for fairy tales. They're told in every culture on earth. And to me, that is really why they are so one another reason they're so powerful, because they touch on universal themes and concerns with culturally authentic um, coloring and nuance to them. So the same Cinderella story uh, that we're familiar with, there are well over 1,000 different variants, and not just different versions by different illustrators, but different stories. Almost every culture on Earth has a story that's very similar to Cinderella. And they were not written in the 20th century. These have been told for millennia by people of various cultures. And that universality of fairy tales is one of the things that I find the most exciting, and why I believe they are such powerful messengers about resilience, because it's the resilience that helps their characters get to their happily ever after, and not just like a poof of magic fairy dust. So that's my, in a nutshell, Fairy Tales 101. And guess what? Even though they're wonderful, and I think they're wonderful, and scholars think they're wonderful, a lot of people do not like them, as Deb alluded to. I went a few months ago, I went on to Google and I put in headlines about fairy tales, and these are the kinds of things I came up with. Harmful stereotypes, old women the face of evil, too much supernaturalism, skepticism about reality. 5 reasons to stop reading your children your fairy tales right now. Disney princesses say there's an issue with consent and true love's kiss. Not a happy collection. And that didn't even touch on what Deb talked about, was the violence and the fear of scaring children with fairy tales. So I'd just like to mention that I've been doing fairy tales professionally for over 40 years. And those same concerns, some of them are more refined now. The consent came in within the last decade or so, but a lot of the concerns have been expressed by parents for all those 40 years. And we need to think about what's been going on with our understanding of play during that same period of time. And I think that there's some linkages of things that we are trying to protect kids from. The other big word is resilience in my work. I just mentioned it, and it's the same thing. Resilience has all of these different definitions. When I first encountered it in the 2013, 2014, it was really kind of the turf of the child development people. That's no longer the case. Again, here's some headlines. 194 articles ranging from climate change, COVID, hurricanes, natural disasters, as well as psychology. I took my computer in to have it worked on a couple of years ago, in the IT a genius at the Genius Bar said, "Oh, I love your screensaver," which said happily ever resilient. And she thought I was talking about the resilience of computer systems, which had nothing to do with fairy tales. We hear about rural resilience, pro-democracy, is our government system resilient, climate resilient. From the New York Times, how losing a pet can make you stronger and build resilience. So resilience is like fairy tales. Everybody thinks they know what it means. And so it's used in many different ways. And what I would like to do tonight is just kind of narrow it down and figure out exactly, when I talk about resilience, what am I talking about? And that's as to kind of get a set, because the kind of resilience that we'll be talking about tonight has the most to do, I believe, with play as well as with fairy tales. All right, so what do I think resilience is? My understanding of resilience came largely from Dr. Ann Maston's research. Dr. Maston works out of the University of Minnesota and has been studying resilience for like more than 30 years. That's been her entire research focus. And what she has discovered is kind of a global definition is resilience is the capacity to bounce back after overcoming adversity. And she did all of her studies were about mostly starting looking at children who'd experienced great adversity, whether it was great poverty, war, abuse, natural disasters, and looking at why some kids seem to do okay after that adversity and other kids did not. And she started to tease out what were the factors that helped children be able to move forward and live healthy, happy, productive lives, whereas other kids ended up not having that experience after the same kinds of adverse impact on them. She wrote a book. She's written a lot of stuff, but my favorite book of hers is called Ordinary Magic. And obviously, the word magic in the title was what drew me right in, because magic, fairy tale, she actually starts the book talking about fairy tale heroines and heroes and how they have all these magical powers, and that's not really what resilience is about. It's not about having extraordinary powers. It's about having these very ordinary experiences that help to nurture the resilience in our brains. Um, Harvard Center on the Developing Child has used her work as one of their foundational pieces for their work on resilience. And so it kind of wove the deep dive into neuroscience into her research and theoretical model of what resilience was. So it's pretty good stuff, I think, especially for a fairy tale person. Pretty weighty research and compelling. Having resilience, what Dr. Maston found is it offers the best protection against trauma, toxic stress, all kinds of different adverse childhood experiences, substance use disorders, mental health issues, that because of the way our brains work, um, if you have bad things happen to you, having a more resilient brain will allow you to bounce back. And she's identified how we can help nurture those brains as well. The most important thing that I took, one of the most important things that I took out of her research is that we all need resilience. We tend to look at we talk about trauma sensitive and trauma informed work with kids, and very, very important. But the bottom line is life is uncertain, change happens, adversity happens to all of us, and we have no way of predicting what kinds of life experiences we're going to have to overcome as we go through become adults. And so for me, resilience is the kind of the number one thing that I hope that we can all nurture in children, because that's what is going to help them move on and have happy, successful, and hopefully playful lives. Here's a little graphic. I took her work, and this is Jack and the Beanstalk. He's a pretty resilient little guy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him. But just as a model of, Maston talked about these protective factors for resilience. So experiences that when a individual has them, they have been found to increase the chances that the person will have would be resilient, and that how it impacts their brain development. So these are relationships, initiative, executive functions, self-regulation, and cultural affirmation. And we're going to talk a little bit about each one of those and how they compare to fairy tales, but also play. Because if you think about just taking a look at the little buzzing bees and all of the characteristics of these protective factors for resilience, you'll probably start to recognize that it sounds a lot like the play research that you have probably been taking a look at, and why we think it's so important for children to play. All right, so fairy tales and resilience, myth versus reality. As a lifelong fairy tale person, this is what people think my life is like. Everything's happy and rosy, and fairy tales are just about that happy ever after, and magic and rainbows and unicorns. In reality, this is what fairy tales are all about. They are about overcoming those giants and dragons and figuring out how to be fierce, getting help from the people who can help you, pursuing things even when you're scared. That's what fairy tales are about. This is an illustration from Molly Whuppie and the Giant, retold by Robin Muller. And like many of the fairy tale illustrations in here, this is my disclaimer because I realize this is eventually going to go on YouTube and other people might look at it. Most of the illustrations in here, I took pictures of from my picture book, so they are my personal photographs, and hopefully that will avoid any kind of people getting upset about copyright stuff. Just look at this girl's face. Molly Whuppie, I mean, she's going to kick that giant's butt. And even though he's so much bigger, he's holding her in his hand, she's fierce and she knows how to get over it. And that's resilience. So we're going to take a look at these protective factors now. And the first one is attachment and relationships. And Maston said that obviously having a strong relationship with your primary caregiver, we've known that for decades and a century, that is extremely important. And in fairy tales, you're going to see a lot of evidence of those close caregiver relationships. So this is a version of Beauty and the Beast done by Chuku Lee and Pat Cummings. And obviously the beauty character has a very close relationship with her father. There are plenty of fairy tale characters that don't have that. Think about Snow White and her stepmother, for example, or Hansel and Gretel's parents take them and they leave them out in the middle of the woods. And to me, that's a message that children also are need to hear, is that those not everything is happy. Not all relationships are tight, but we can figure out how to make them work and move forward. Masson also said importance of having relationships with other competent adults. So she talked about that even if a child comes from a family that isn't terribly supportive, having a teacher or a coach or an auntie or a grandmother or neighbors, those people can help to provide that protective factor for children as well. And this happens in fairy tales too. Think about the fairy godmothers that pop up out of nowhere. Or maybe the little old woman who's in the wood by the well, and she's the one who is able to provide guidance and help to the hero or heroine when they're lost and they don't know what to do. Sometimes in fairy tales, they turn out to be these wise animals like birds or cats. It doesn't really matter. It's just the idea that we all need guides who have more experience than we do and can offer us that kind of support. One of the things about Maston's research that I found especially exciting as a play person is she identified that the importance of having close relationships with siblings and peers. And that's, of course, what kids develop the most through their play, is being able to play with your best friend, to play with a group of children. And she said that when people have those peer relationships, whether in the family or outside of the family, that's also a protective factor for resilience. And if you think of fairy tales again, think about Hansel and Gretel. Brother and sister tag team it through all kinds of stuff and stay together. Not all peer sibling relationships in fairy tales are happy. You can see these fierce sisters staring at Beauty through their snarly eyes. Those are her sisters. And they did all they could to kind of mess her up and trick her into not going back and doing what she said she was going to do, which was to return to the beast. But again, it offers kids a model of saying, okay, so here's peers saying this to me. What do I do with it? How do I help these relationships make me make the right decisions? Just real quickly, pop into the chat if you have an idea about how relationships are connected to risky play or to play in general. Anybody have some thoughts about that? Nope. Okay, moving on. Keep that in mind. The next protect learning with, okay, I'm sorry, I was too fast. Learning, kids take more risks with friends. Great point. Children need to trust their peers. That trust between the adult and child, absolutely. If you're going to climb up on a high, high tower and the adult says, I believe you can do it, it's going to help you. Other kids, oh yeah, other kids have better ideas. Yep, interacting with others. Hi, Anu, and learning from it. So, as we're thinking about, I'm going to be focusing on the fairy tale piece of it, but as you're thinking about these protective factors, they are all nurtured through play as well. And no one is nurtured more strongly through play, really, than this next one, which is initiative. When I think of initiative, I think of that young child who says, I can do it, with that fierce look on the 2-year-old who is ready to tackle the world. That's initiative. We know that kids have wonderful ideas and they can take those ideas and use them to meet their own needs. That's kind of the nutshell of what initiative is all about. It includes things like being able to problem solve, self-efficacy and agency, knowing that you can do it and having that confidence in yourself to give it a shot. Motivation to succeed even when things aren't going your way. If the block building falls over 5 times, motivation to succeed is the child who says, you know what, I'm going to build at number 6 and keep on going. We see this all the time with children when they're given open-ended opportunities to play, and we also see it in fairy tales. This particular picture is from the Three Billy Goats Gruff, in case you don't recognize it. Probably everybody does, hopefully. And that's I chose it because think about those billy goats. Um, they've eaten all the grass on their side of the river, and they see across the river there's nice green grass. To meet their need for food, they need to figure out how to get to it, but they know that there's a troll under the bridge. They do some good problem solving. They have the agency to say, you know what, we're going to be able to cross that bridge and get to the other side and get that grass. And they're very motivated to succeed. And they come up with a plan. They're fierce. They are strong. They support each other and they get to the other side. And that's an example of fairy tale initiative. They took a risk because the troll could have eaten any one of them. And that to me is what happens over and over again in fairy tales is the characters are willing to take risks, just like we want kids to do in risky play. And we've been talking about it, play all the time, play. No one can come up with ideas for play like children can come up with ideas for play. And we, as a classroom teacher with young children, I quickly learned that my ideas were never as good as theirs. And that if I tried to support their play in some meaningful way, they usually would end up leaving the area and going someplace else because the more opportunities we give children to have these ideas of, or have the opportunity to play what they want, when they want, for as long as they want, they're not only going to be more willing to take risks, but they're going to know that they are powerful thinkers, because that's really when we watch kids playing, that's what we see. Anybody have a thought about an example maybe of a time that they have seen kids focus on risky play, taking, demonstrating initiative, whether it's problem solving or agency or motivation to succeed? Think about risky play. Aaron?
I have so many good things coming to mind, but a recent one was children were throwing stuff up onto this roof that was kind of slanted, and they were trying to get stuff to roll down, but things kept getting stuck. And so they used all these materials to construct this ladder, like pulley lever system to get the stuff off the roof. And it was just incredible to see all the ways that they negotiated it and um, my job was to like hold on to materials, but they did not want me to do anything except that.
That's a great, great example. And again, I've been in situations where I was told by directors, like, no, don't let them throw anything up there because, then it might fall off and it hit them on the head. And the fact that you were able to encourage that, you saw so much rich, wonderful initiative playing up. Great. Kelly says, I tried to stop my son, age 2 or 3, from climbing up a tall ladder behind a slide. He turned as I shouted him to make sure he didn't fall, and he told me to go sit on the bench. Same thing as Aaron was saying, like, yeah, you can hold this stuff. We got this. And don't we all need to have that passion and that confidence in ourselves now as adults through all of the things that we're doing? And obviously it starts with children, and it's all over fairy tales. All right, next one up is oh, Deb makes a really good point. We didn't even consider risky play risky. It was just play. And I think that's just like we didn't consider fairy tales as something like scary. I mean, they were just fairy tales. We knew they were stories that everybody loved. And that shift that society has gone through has really done a number. Play badges, I like that. The play injuries were play badges. Yeah. So we've shifted away from a lot of that, and that's what this group is all about. That's what IPA-USA is all about, is helping to bring back that confidence in children's ability to play and make wonderful things happen with it. All right. Executive functions. There's a neuro-nerdy part of it. One of the protective factors for resilience. It's probably everybody's familiar with it. It's the brain's air traffic controller. It kind of happens in your prefrontal cortex. It includes things like working memory, being able to hold in your mind what you're doing while you're doing it. Cognitive flexibility, being able to see alternative ways of doing something if the first one doesn't work. Or just being able to generate a wide variety of ideas and picking one and seeing what happens. Inhibitory control, which is being able to have kind of tamp down your initial impulse and keep in control what it is, your focus on what it is that you want to accomplish, and not let other kinds of things interfere with that. And I picked for my fairy tale, this is a good old Hansel. And if you remember the story, after he and Gretel hear that the parents were going to take him out and leave him in the woods to die, he sneaks out of the house and he picks up all of these white stones in the moonlight. And then he, after they're being led into the woods, he very intentionally puts one down after another so they can find their way back to the house. And that's an example of working memory. He's got to remember, like, in spite of everything that's going on around him, like, drop the stone. We've gone a little bit, drop another stone. When they kind of catch wind that something might be going on, the parents, and because they show back up at home and the door is locked and he can't go get white stones the second time, he realizes he has a chunk of white bread in his pocket, and he then takes it and he uses the white bread. Cognitive flexibility. When he discovers that, in fact, bread doesn't work as well because the birds come along and eat it all up, he uses good inhibitory control and is able to hold his act together and with his sister find them what they think is a safe space. Unfortunately, it's the witch's house, but that's a whole nother part of the story. So again, just an example of how in day-to-day life, as in fairy tales, as in play, our executive functions are just part of who we are, how we think and process the world. And kids need an opportunity to both develop those, but also to see what it looks like when they are developed and what happens. All right, self-regulation, every early childhood educator's favorite. Self-regulation, as we know, is the child's ability to control their bodies, manage powerful emotions, and maintain focus and attention. And it's really tied closely in with a child's temperament. So some kids obviously have a much easier time than others. It's very much impacted by stress. anybody who's ever come home from a day at work and hit up the gallon of ice cream in their freezer understands that your self-regulation is impacted by stress. And that's one of the reasons that it's such an important protective factor for resilience, because the more self-regulation is developed, the easier time we have when we do become stressed to maintain it. It is very much connected to self-regulation, or sorry, executive function skills. There's a lot of overlap and way beyond this to get into it. It's very much what is developed through play. You can't have a child, kids, if they have no other reason to self-regulate than to keep the play going, it's a powerful incentive for them to figure out how not to pop their friend in the mouth, because if they do, game over. These are just some examples from fairy tales. This is from The Girl Who Spun Gold, which is a West Indies or Rumpelstiltskin story. And I kind of look at Rumpelstiltskin as kind of the poster child for not being self-regulated. He holds it together for a long time, but as soon as he finds out that somebody knows his name, in every version that I've read, he pretty much explodes. And I think that's a great metaphor for how we feel when we are not being self-regulated. Why is it important? Because kids need to know that they will become dysregulated. That's just the way we are as human beings. But for him, good things don't happen because of it. It's the people who are self-regulated, like the elves and the shoemaker. One of the things I love about it is that the man and his wife, the shoemaker and his wife, hide quietly. There's so much hiding that goes on in fairy tales, which is an example of using self-regulation and being able to have good outcomes. The other pictures are Cinderella. She's the poster child for self-regulation. She's at the ball. She's having a fabulous time. She knows she's supposed to leave by midnight, and guess what she does? And that, to me, is an example of great self-regulation. This other one is from a Chinese version of Beauty and the Beast, and she meets the dragon, who is the beast in this. Obviously, very easy to be terrified, but she regulates her emotions so that she can reach out and establish a connection and make sure that she is safe. Anybody think of, we're going to switch to fairy tales. Can you think of a example from a fairy tale of self-regulation? Okay, hold that thought. We'll come back to it. The last protective factor that Masson talked about was cultural affirmation. Snow White takes a bite from each plate of the dwarfs. So that's pretty good self-regulation, even though she's not supposed to take any, right? So cultural affirmation is being part of something that is bigger than yourself, is how Maston describes it. This can be feeling part of a family or an extended family, a community. It doesn't have to be culture with a capital C, as I call it. It can be any of the groups that we are part of that helps to affirm that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, a faith-based community, all of those. And it can, some of the high, food or music or language or stories. And that, to me, is one of the ways that fairy tales are so very powerful. As I mentioned, there's so many versions of Cinderella, variants of Cinderella from all over the world. This, I just grabbed some out. Yes, Gemma, 100%. Sharing different versions of the same story really builds that cognitive flexibility as well, as kids compare and contrast and spot the things that are that they're familiar with but have shifted. Great connection. Thank you. I also think it's important to help kids just being able to identify that even though we're different, there are these commonalities, and that they may know Cinderella had a glass slipper, but their friend from Iraq knows that she has a golden sandal. And those kinds of connections, I think, in my fairy tale mind really can help children start to put together the fact that even though we're all challenges happen to everybody, everybody's got ways of overcoming them, and we all can work on this thing together. Okay, so we've talked about resilience. We've talked about fairy tales. So how do they connect to risky play, except for the fact that this is a play thing? We've talked a little bit about it, but we're going to get into that a bit more now. This is a quote from Peter Gray that I got from one of his Substacks, which is Risky Play, Why Children Seek It and Need It. And I thought it was an interesting connection between fairy tales and risky play and resilience. Fear, you would think, is a negative experience to be avoided whenever possible. That's why we don't let risky play happen, and that's why we say we don't want kids to hear fairy tales. Yet, as everyone who has a child or once was one knows, children love to play in risky ways, ways that can combine the joy of freedom with just the right measure of fear to produce that exhilarating blend we identify as thrill. Mother Nature, and for those of you who don't know, Peter Gray is an evolutionary biologist, so he's about natural selection. Mother Nature endowed us, especially when we're young, with strong drives to play in ways that have life-promoting benefits. So why, if that's true, did she endow children with a drive to flirt with danger in their play? And in my opinion, a lot of it has to do with resilience, because we need to develop resilience, and risky play develops resilience. Sorry, I'm like moving moving the chat around here a little bit. So how does it combine? Also in the same Substack, he cited Ellen Sandcedar's 6 categories of risky play. I've never actually played with those in fairy tales, but I decided, hey, this is the perfect time to experiment and see. I know about fairy tales and resilience, but do they match up with those categories of risky play? And here's, you can see Kate and the Beanstalk. She's got her axe, and so does this child I found on Pixabay Bay, who I hope is one day my grandson. Looks exactly like that with his axe. Because that's what adventure playgrounds are all about, is giving kids the stuff. So these are the categories. The first one she calls Great Heights. And children climb trees and other structures to scary heights. We've all seen it. We know what that looks like with kids, and try to stop it if you're a fearful person. But there's so many in fairy tales too. This is from Rapunzel. And obviously she's in a tall tower. How does the prince get up? He climbs her, in this case, her dreadlocks. He climbs right up there. This is Rachel Isadora's wonderful version of it. But fairy tales are filled with examples of climbing. Can anybody come up with any other examples? Besides good old Rapunzel? Jack and the Beanstalk. Yeah, actually, I had all these Jack and the Beanstalk pictures, and I was like, let's bring Rapunzel into this. She was in a high tower too. Yep, Jack and the Beanstalk is perfect. I mean, kids just, I mean, they just want to climb, and like whatever it is. Ooh, that sounds fascinating, Carla. That's lots here to delve into. Risky play in children's literature. Wonderful. Yeah, heroines climb glass mountains. Kelly, I was looking for that as a picture too. Glass mountains. There are a lot of fairy tale characters that climb trees to hide. So kind of interesting about with that. All right, so Great Heights. Is it in fairy tales? Yeah. Is it in risky play? As long as you have something to climb and you let them do it, kids are going to climb. All right. So next category, rapid speeds. I love this one. Children swing on vines and ropes and playground swings. They slide fast on sleds and swing or skates. They shoot down rapids on logs and boats. They ride bikes, skateboards. They want it fast. And this particular illustration, she's riding in the wind in east of the sun, west of the moon, from a really old book I found when I was digging through my stuff looking for pictures, and I just thought, kind of looks like a Girl Scout, but whatever. She's riding the wind. And I think if you think about in fairy tales, there are lots of examples of characters who are riding, going very, very fast. Can anybody think of any? Oh, Cinderella hides in a tree, Kelly said. You're right. Anybody think of any other fairy tale characters that go fast, fast, fast? Seven League Boots? Yeah. Oh, Jim, I had forgotten about that story with the Pele and Polohi, the Hawaiian story about racing sleds down a mountain. Yeah. Riding on an eagle's back. Yes. I was looking through some Thumbelina versions today, and she rides on rides on a butterfly, and Tom Thumb goes on very fast on a horseback. So there are all kinds of characters that really go fast. Harry Potter on his broomstick. Yeah. Tarzan, he swings. Not a fairy tale though. Sorry. But definitely in children's literature. Wonderful. So yeah, it's there. Dangerous tools, ha ha ha. Depending on their culture, kids in risky play with knives, bows and arrows, farm machinery, woodworking equipment, and other tools known to be dangerous. I was a teacher who always let young children, preschoolers, cut real vegetables with real knives, for example. That's just it's important. You can't cut a potato with a plastic knife, so why even try? But in fairy tales, we saw the axes of Jack and the Beanstalk, or Kate and the Beanstalk in this case. This is actually a illustration from Ramona of the Blazing Sword, and the new Snow White movie. Some of the parts that people were objecting to about that they weren't the real story. They actually came from this and from variants from North Africa and including the robbers. Anyway, all kind of a side effect. But I love the fact that here's a woman wielding a very powerful sword. Can you think of other fairy tale heroes that use dangerous tools? Yep. Marita? I'm actually not familiar, but I guess I am. I think anybody else? There are many fairy tales that include axes, for example, like cutting down trees. I think the golden goose was in a tree that somebody cut down. I don't know, Kelly, maybe you can help me out with that one. There are the Seven Doors mining tools. Oh, perfect. Yeah, good one. I hadn't even thought of that one. That's perfect. But because woodcutter and Little Red, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he actually not only cuts trees down, but he like slices the wolf, and the Red Riding Hood and her grandmother pop out. So he's got it all going on. Because these are part of everyday life, they are obviously included in fairy tales, which were told for real people who were living real lives, especially in cultures where they didn't have anything that was automated. That's the roots of all of these. So they give kids an opportunity to see these kinds of tools being used. As far as dangerous tools, I mean, I mentioned the knives. The first preschool that I ever taught in had a wood bench It was wonderful. I mean, the kids had real saws, real hammers, real nails. All of the adventure playgrounds I've ever seen have real tools for children to use. And again, it really teaches them self-regulation. It teaches them self-efficacy and agency that they can saw through a board, but it teaches them self-regulation as well as nurtures their executive functions as well. Because if you have, oh, great, Carla, you have tools in your nature preschool. They they're careful. All of us have cut our hands with knives if we, when we're cooking and not paying attention. At least I have. Everybody I've ever talked to, all the adults I know have. So that paying attention is part of self-regulation and executive function. So offering kids the opportunity to use real tools nurtures these aspects of resilience as well. Oh, great. Yeah. Deconstructive play is so much fun. Okay. Next one, dangerous elements. Woo. Kids like to play with fire and in or near deep bodies of water. There are a lot of Waldorf schools, I'm sure a lot of nature schools that actually are near creeks really for that reason, because kids are fascinated and want to get into the water. Deb, you were mentioning about this a program that's in Louisville, where the conference, the IPA-USA conference, is going to be in October, having the river brings all of the stuff to this adventure playground. I mean, it's another great example of kids wanting to be near water in risky play incorporates that, and fire.
One of the when I was in China doing professional development in 2013 and 2015, what I loved about the Chinese playgrounds for children that are huge, bigger than elementary school playgrounds because they have so many children. Sometimes in their early childhood programs, they have up to 350 to 400 children in one setting. And every one of them had a koi pond, and there was no fence around it. It was right there. Every child, every playground I went on had a koi pond with no protections. They could just walk right on over. It was, it made me recognize, and their risky play was also really interesting because they had children doing things that are risky, but that are not dangerous. So it was a wonderful, amazing balance of, like, for example, they tied 2 parallel ropes to trees that they had on the playground, and the parallel ropes were probably 4 feet apart, and the bottom rope was probably 8 to 10 inches off the ground. And the children would hang on to the top rope and then try to walk across on the bottom rope, keeping their balance, and they would swing back and forth to regain their balance. And that was just one of unbelievable amounts that they were able to do that were risky, but the children, the smiles on their faces and it was joyful to watch them play. It was amazing.
Yeah, I think Carla said that Anji Play does great things with this. I think Deb was talking about an Anji Play environment.
No, this was in Beijing,
Okay.
and I wish I had been to Angie Play. I didn't know about Angie Play when I was in China for those 2 summers, but it was in Beijing and Dalian.
Okay.
Truly, truly amazing what they were doing. And every playground I went to in visiting the early childhood programs, every single one of them had risky play happening all the time. It was beautiful.
Wow, that's inspiring. And again, we get back to, you're like, well, I can't do that in my program. Well, you got the fairy tales, because so many fairy tales have characters who end up going into the water. This is from Gift of the Crocodile, which is actually from Indonesia. It's a Cinderella story from Indonesia. And the river and with the crocodiles is throughout the entire book. And there are many, many fairy tales. Again, Tom Thumb and Thumbelina both like end up in the water. And as far as fire goes, the only one I could think of, and maybe you guys can think of something else, I thought of the Three Little Pigs, cooking the fire and letting the wolf pop into the boiling water. Anybody come up with any others for fire or water? Oh, duh, good one. Hansel and Gretel in the oven. That's that pretty, that's, can't believe I didn't even think of that example. Wonderful, thank you. Stone soup, yeah. And again, it isn't really playing with it, but when we think of what kids do, like they don't build fires to play with necessarily. I mean, well, some I do. I like to poke sticks and stuff in it, but they build fires because they loved the fires, and they could potentially, like if they're allowed, they will cook on it. They would, it's not just a toy, it's or like something to play with and explore. It's something that they know has function. So I like the stone soup analogy too. And many folk and fairy tales obviously have cooking in them and would be using that. All right. Getting down there, rough and tumble play. Children everywhere chase one another. Rough and tumble is probably the most common of the risky play that we actually see in programs that are a little bit better with rough and tumble. They chase kids. They might fight playfully in a way that could lead to injury. And again, think about that self-regulation. If somebody cries, the game is over. If a teacher or a parent hears that somebody's been hurt, everybody out of the pool. You can't play that anymore. So it really gives kids a strong incentive to keep the playful in fighting playfully. This is something I also found really interesting in what Peter Gray said about these categories, is that in chase games, the preferred position is the one who is being chased, because that person has vulnerability. And so often in fairy tales, it's the youngest child, the brother that doesn't seem quite so smart, the person who is weaker, the othered, and the vulnerable are the ones who end up being the heroes and saving the day. And I think that the fact that kids intuitively know that, they want to be the one who's being chased rather than having to chase someone. There might be some interesting connection there. I don't know. I was just kind of mulling it around this week. And of course, the illustration is Jack running from the giant. Lots and lots and lots of examples of chase scenes in folk and fairy tales. Anybody come up with any of them off the top of your head? Cinderella running from the prince. Yep. Great one. Everybody's going to go back to their favorite fairy tales and go like Snow White from the Queen. Yep. Yeah, great. Yeah, right. She's in the forest and the huntsman says, go, you go, and she goes. All right. So lots of that idea that chasing and that roughhousing. I couldn't come up with any of the roughhousing, and I'm thinking I'm just not. Um, One of the things that is intriguing to me about folk and fairy tales is that they often have um, they're just kind of the pared down version, and so they might say he rolled on the ground, the two of them rolled on the ground and then move on, and it's not a major plot point. So as we're kind of trying to think about it, it may not be as explicit. All right, last one, I believe, of our risky play categories: disappearing and getting lost. Little kids play hide and seek all the time, and they like I mean, they love it. And like, they're not really that hidden because their feet stick out and all of those kinds of things, but they feel as though they are somehow hiding and being separate from their companions. And older kids often will go off into the further away from adults, and so they can really have adventures. And I know as a kid, that I played, like in my neighborhood, there was the woods at the end of the street that wasn't developed, and we went there and we built forts, and we spent lots and lots of time being completely lost and disappeared, that nobody would be able to ever find us again until it was time to go home and eat, and then we all somehow found our way home. Again, this is a real strong like Into the Woods. I mean, the woods itself is just part of a fairy tale, like archetype, really. Carla, I don't know if you were talking about the being chased for Hansel and Gretel, or getting lost in the woods, but it works for really for both of them. Anybody think of any others that right off the top of your head of fairy tale characters who are lost in the woods, or lost anywhere, really? Sometimes you'll hear about stories, and there are a lot of Russian folk and fairy tales, or fairy tales that have like, and he walked in the woods for years, like that, it's always years. Little Red Riding Hood. Yep, perfect. And kids are fascinated by anything that is mysterious, because what we don't know is what we want to know more about. Pied Piper. Yeah, not a good ending for the kids, no. So they are rich with all of these risky play factors. Anu, do you want to say more? You do think there's more to it?
Yeah, Stephanie, I feel like in my research, I found that for the same reason, they're fascinated by rainbows or by clouds, because it's something that's beyond. So in some ways, I feel like there are no barriers to their imagination. They can go anywhere. So it could be interpreted in many different ways.
Mhm.
I could also say that maybe going into the forest gives them a place to feel more empowered. They can go anywhere, and the imagination can take them anywhere because there are no parameters.
Mhm.
And in when we think about rainbows, it's like, oh, I wonder what it is. They know that it's part of gold, but you see, they are very fascinated. So when I did research, I found this was one of the common themes. Something that was always mysterious fascinated them.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful.
So I don't know. I mean, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking there are so many aspects. I've always told you this is so fascinating. There's so many different aspects. But even looking at it from a cultural lens, no matter which culture you go, those big ideas remain the same.
Yes, that's one of the things that is fascinating to me about both play and fairy tales. Thank you. Okay. So why does it matter? And I'm going to go back to neuroscience to see if we can make one more connection between resilience, fairy tales, and risky play. Smith, and I guess he's down at the bottom, the citation is down at the bottom, out of Berkeley, started to do research to figure out how do we respond physiologically to stories. And so he hooked people up with electrodes on their brains, and he wanted to know if knowing that would be somehow he could make a connection between our instinct to tell stories and how stories shape our behavior. So really fascinating research. And what he found is that it did. He used primarily fairy tales and fantasy stories. He did obviously not very young children. He did older kids, middle school and up, and through adulthood. And as they were reading these fairy tale-like stories, he found that, and reading about danger, he found evidence of something that he called transportation. So they were reading the story, they knew they were sitting in their chair and they were reading or they were listening, however, whatever modality, but that their imagination actually took them to where this was happening, as though it were actually happening to them in real time. And their cortisol levels, their stress hormones, when they were, being chased by the giant or whatever, went up as though it would if they were actually being chased by a dragon or a lion. And then after the resolution, their oxytocin, which is the care hormone, or and the dopamine neurotransmitters flooded their system. So when they got to the happy ever after, they were filled with hope and optimism from a neurological point of view, not just like how do you feel, but and I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't do a deep dive into it, but his research was really compelling. And what it got me thinking about was that if we read children these stories or tell them these stories or they read them themselves, so perhaps reading hearing connects to saying, oh, vicarious risk. Oh, interesting. Gemma, I'm not familiar with that, but vicarious risk would 100% seem like that's what you are experiencing in when you're reading something yourself. I mean, you can also talk about viewing, and that's a whole nother subject about, like what as adults, what do we watch, or what do kids watch? But maybe I'll have to investigate that. So yeah, what Smith definitely discovered is that children we do experience dangerous situations in fantasy through as though it were happening to us. And what that does is it increases the neural pathways that we use to respond to real danger and real stress. And because the more you use those neural pathways, the stronger they become. And so is it too much of a leap to think that if we offer children, just as though when they go out and they are doing risky play, that where there's risk but not danger, they are developing not only resilience, but also all of those pathways to know that the next time when they do encounter something that may be actually dangerous, they have better skills to adapt to it. And he's saying that similar things happen through the reading of fairy tales or literature that has that danger element, as long as it comes back down to and has that happy ever after. So what happens if fairy tales are banished? Pretty similar things as happen to risky play. Number one that I see, my work is a lot with younger children, but even with teenagers, is where do their make-believe play schemes come from? They come from the stories that they experience, hear, read, watch. And so if we wipe out folk and fairy tales, I believe it has had already, and potentially will have a stronger impact on what kinds of make-believe play they engage in. And make-believe play, there's a lot of research that says that it's a powerful way of developing executive function skills, as well as the imagination. I think it could potentially have an impact on the imagination. As Anu was saying, like what is a rainbow? How do we open up children's imaginations to wondering about all of those things? And obviously with folk and fairy tales, because they involve magic and all of that, it stimulates the imagination. And I really believe that they are the best children's literature to help children develop an understanding of how story works. And that is, you have to have it for literacy. You also have to for real literacy, deep literacy, you have to be able, I believe, to see pictures in your head. You have to be able to visualize and construct mental images. And that's something that with the amount of screen time that most children are experiencing now is already diminished. So this offers another avenue. Cultural context. We could talk about how even Disney has permeated U.S. culture for hours. That could be I'm sure somebody has done multiple studies about it. But whether you're talking about anything from marketing to toys to stories to the metaphors that we use. I Googled the Three Bears a while ago, and there are entire theories of economics based on the Three Bears. This one's too hot, this one's too cold, and this one's just right. And so these folk and fairy tales really have infiltrated our culture. And if kids don't know them, then how many cultural references are going to be lost? How many books that are based and make references to folk and fairy tales and mythology are just not going to make any sense because they've never heard or read them as kids. Risk adversity, just like we know that with risky play, one of the reasons we want kids to do it is life is a risk. Let's face it. Like there's scary stuff that goes on a lot, and we want kids to be prepared for it. If they think everything's all happiness and rainbows and butterflies, then when real life steps in, they're not prepared. And I think that offering kids the opportunity to have that little bit of a scare when the witch is going to, is my gosh, is the witch actually going to eat Hansel? Is she going to push Gretel into the oven and then see, nah, they've got it all going on. They figured it out. And Gretel pushes the witch into the oven. I think that's a much more empowering message than the witch and Hansel and Gretel sitting down and having tea together and deciding that it's all going to be okay, and that the witch regrets that she ever captured them and she's really just such a nice witch and like leads them home. I think that children need to know that they are empowered to fight evil and overcome adversity, and that to do that often involves taking risks. I truly believe in my heart of hearts that folk and fairy tales, especially fairy tales, give kids a roadmap to resilience, and that the stories we read feed into our stories that we tell about ourselves, and that these are powerful ones that will help them all become more resilient and we have no idea what 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now is going to look like. And it's important to make sure that we give kids the tools to encounter everything that comes along. There's my book. There's my website. I've got a newsletter. Deb told you all that stuff. And thank you very much. I'd love to talk more about it if people have questions.
Stephanie, of course, this is always wonderful. I learned so much, even though I read fairy tales all the time. I learn so much every time Stephanie is talking, because I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. And when my grandchildren were young, then we read them fairy tales. But one of the things that I think really, and it's not a fairy tale, but I think it's a modern day thing that was very helpful to kids growing up was Harry Potter. I really think it was. It's not what we want, but certainly Harry Potter was scary. It was good against evil. They had lots of magic in it. And, people, even my grandchildren who are still reading the Harry Potter book. So they're from 16 down to 3. And of course, the 3 and 5-year-old aren't reading them yet. But boy, the 8, 9, 10, 12, and 16 are reading them. And they will say, well, and they'll talk about Harry Potter's resilience, and they'll use that word. He didn't give up. He did the right thing. He was persistent. And so I wish more children would read other older fairy tales. But I will say that that is one series that seems to be resonating with resilience. So, but I'd rather they read Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, or
I think they need to read it all. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's the bottom line is I don't think you can, I mean, look, I've got plenty of fairy tales, and these are just my big fat ones, although the picture books are in my other room. I think that, I mean, Harry Potter, there's actually a video that I rediscovered that I was on Maston's model of resilience, looking at Harry Potter and the characters of Harry Potter and how they all, like some like Hermione came from a happy home and all of this kind of stuff. And, like here's her
or
resilience
yeah.
and like Draco Malfoy, had all the good stuff going on for him, and he still turned out to be a schmuck. And how all of these different things. And Harry had this, tragedy of his family, but still was the most resilient. He was the chosen one. And I mean, I think you can apply this to not just traditional folk and fairy tales. That was what my research was. So obviously I'm kind of sticking to that. And I think that it's because and they're so accessible for teachers and for parents, because they're 398.2, go to the library, you got tons of them to choose from. But I think lots and lots of children's literature have deep messages of resilience, like Harry Potter. I love the book. So, I mean,
I think one of the things about Stephanie's book too is that she gives you, it's not lesson plans, but she gives you ideas on how you could embed these qualities that she's been talking about into a with a fairy tale. And I think that is the most powerful part of, I mean, I love the book, but I think it's such a powerful tool for teachers to feel comfortable beginning to explore fairy tales again.
Thanks, Deb.
Anu has her hand up.
Yeah, I was just, and maybe I joined in, I apologize, joined in a little bit later, so I might have missed it. So if you already covered it, I apologize. My thought is only about, we have children now in our classroom that come from many different cultures, right? So sometimes when we read, I think somewhere, and Steph, I have not read your book, although I have heard you speak about fairy tales, and I always find it very fascinating. Is that it's important for children to see themselves. And when we are talking about a very diverse classroom, how do we balance that? And I hope somewhere we convey the message. I couldn't agree with you more. And there are stories in all different cultures that speak to that. The teachers or educators think about making it more diverse, because otherwise it becomes like those children may not ever see themselves in those tales. And that, we all know as educators, not the best for them, for their own self-esteem.
Absolutely. And I guess that's one of the reasons that I was so fascinated with folk and fairy tales, because many of the same stories have versions in a wide variety of cultures. So as a teacher, I always had definitely any culture that was represented in my classroom, I would find the Cinderella version for that culture and include that in the if we were reading a book, a fairy tale, I would always try to include multiple variants of it. It's a little harder to get some cultures in picture book format.
Very hard. I heard somebody in your group talking about China and Beijing. I was in China and I wanted to bring a book, a similar thing. Like I always go, we all teachers want to get a book from wherever we travel to. And I cannot tell you how long and how hard it was for me to find anything that was not Disney. The books were filled with Disney in Chinese, but was so hard to find. I finally was able to find something this time, not even in China, in Taiwan, where I could find a book that was their folk tale. it's just, I guess it's globalization and something to be said about that.
I mean,
But what's happening is you see less and less of that. And that's just nothing we can do. But I agree with you. I think that's very important for our students when we are teaching, for them to know that they have to make an effort to find something. And, maybe not a book, but maybe on the internet.
I mean, a couple of things. I think that everybody should know who their children's librarian is. Because children's librarians are the best source of that information. I found that YouTube has been a really big help of when I'm doing my newsletter, and there's a book that I haven't had a chance to get my hands on yet. There are a lot of, during the pandemic, people from all over the world were reading stories to children, and that's one source. But I also think that there are wonderful anthologies of folk and fairy tales from every culture in the world. And you have to be willing to take a book that is not a picture book at some time to hit that exact. I mean, there are ways of finding out which story is from. If you have a child from Indonesia, or if you have a child from Malaysia, you can find their stories, but you may have to either tell it orally or read it without pictures and figure out a different way of sharing it and presenting it. And I think that's something, as a teacher, I always did. And I know it takes time, and I know everybody's really busy, but I think there are many, many ways that no child should feel not represented when the fairy tales of the world, all of them.
Yeah, and I think that part, I feel like with AI, we could get that, the visual, if we wanted.
Oh.
If we wanted. So we are in a better place now.
That's a great idea. Thanks, on wonderful.
One of the that is actually coming in on Sunday, and I'm really excited about it, is a project that the Children, Families, and Communities students do. And it's their genealogical study. And so they have to go find their roots, talk to great grandparents, grandparents, find a country of origin. And the other powerful piece is, if you don't have a country of origin because you came here on a slave ship, that's a very aha moment of learning for everybody else in the classroom. But what they do is they go back and they find children's songs, children's games, children's literature, and then a host of other things that is from one of their countries of origin. And they have to give me pictures and the words and the stories. And it is it's a great way. And what I find so fascinating is that the games that we play in the US, they play somewhere else, they just call it something different. But it's the songs are similar, the games are similar, and the children's fairy tales are always in there. So that's just another thing. Get your students to do a study on a country that they could just go and investigate and find those fairy tales there. That it is a powerful assignment for them that really gets them thinking about their roots. Okay, so thank you, everyone. If you don't have any other questions, you will get your YouTube video and a handout with all those links that I was showing you that Michelle was putting in. Please think about submitting a session for the 2025 conference. We need lots of play people. It's going to be great. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. We're happily ever resilient for the next week or so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.